Hello, this is Marc Brunet with QBrush.com, and in this chapter we're going to be looking at the final 3 things that we need to do before we can even start painting. So those 3 things are going to be the composition, the reference sheets, and the color palette. I see those 3 things as kind of like the ingredients on a recipe. So we're going for a very simple recipe. You know, we're not an experienced chef. We're not gonna try to do things on our own and invent new recipes. We're going by, you know, one that already exists, that is trusted, and that means that we're gonna sort of prepare ourselves before we actually go into our painting. I know a lot of experienced artists, they don't do that. They know already what they're gonna do and everything is already there in their head. But what we're trying to do here is try to sort of build a framework so that we have something solid to work off of, and then after that it's only a matter of you and your creativity to sort of build upon that. But if we have a strong foundation, at least one part of the painting is going to be solid. So the first one is going to be composition, like I said. So we're going to be looking at 2 different composition types, and those 2 are pretty much the most famous ones, the most obvious in terms of art, and you've probably seen them before. And those are the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, or the Fibonacci spiral. The first one we're going to be looking at here is the rule of thirds. As you can see here, pretty straightforward. It's just you take whatever your canvas is and split everything in thirds, and whenever you have an intersection, this is where your focal point should be, basically. If you have like a main focal point and then maybe a secondary focal point, that would be on one of the other intersection. But basically you want to have your main focal point on one of those 4. It can be anywhere really. And so that would look something like this if we take this photo, for example. Very well balanced in this case, because the focal point or the main character is right on one of the intersections. So by default this is said to be aesthetically pleasing to the eye to look at. So if the character instead was on maybe in the center of the top left square, for example, that would be considered not as good as a composition. And it could still work, don't get me wrong, but you would have to do like more advanced things to sort of make the composition work. So we're not gonna go and venture into that. We're gonna stick to what is supposed to work by default. This is our framework, the composition. The other one that we have here is the golden ratio, or the golden spiral, and basically it's pretty similar to the other one. So whatever you have here, which is a big spiral, you're gonna try to orient everything in your scene to sort of follow that main line, and try to organize your details so that everything is focused more where the squares get really small, as you can see here. So if I see an example of that, that rose image would be perfect for that. So you can see it follows it really well. It follows the curves, and this is a very well balanced image because it follows basically the most famous composition rule like perfectly. So if the rose was centered, for example, that would be a different composition. Or if the rose was further down or maybe further to the right, it would not be as good because it wouldn't follow the rule properly. So now, instead of using photos, I'm going to show you what it actually means when we have something a little bit more abstract. So I'm starting here, and I'm going to do that with the golden ratio, because the golden ratio is what we're going to be using for the painting in the next chapter. And we're not going to use the rule of thirds, and that's, it could have been one or the other. I'm just choosing the golden spiral, the golden ratio. And what we're going to do is, so I have here a bunch of elements. I'm going to take those elements and sort of orient them and place them around the scene so that they follow the golden ratio more, and we're going to see what this means. So looking at this without the lines on them, you can see it's just a mess. Your eye doesn't know where to look at, and it's just very confusing. You're just bouncing around the image and not knowing really where to settle. But once you organize all the elements, and again, those are the same elements that I took in there, and I'm just sort of replacing them so that they follow the curve a little bit more. And you can see already, like, it's very clear where you need to look at. So composition is really just a skill that helps you organize things, organize visual elements within the canvas. So if you would think of maybe a comparison with a book, you know, one page of a book, if you had a bad composition, would be the equivalent of having like one big paragraph of, you know, just solid text, no break, nothing. And having good composition would be like be able to split that text into different paragraphs that make sense and that sort of explain different ideas. And you know, it's basically a better structure, so it allows the viewer to digest it better, and it's just more relaxing to look at, and it's just a better experience overall. So that's what we want to try to do. I know a lot of beginners think that using references is something close to like cheating, and this is really something you need to get out of your head because it's actually very, very counterproductive. I do remember thinking the same way, you know, a long time ago, and what you need to understand is that whenever you are not using references, you're just practicing your memory. So basically, every time you look at a reference, and the reference in this case is in the form of a photo or an image, but it can be anything really. Like if you're looking around your room, you're looking at a bunch of different references. And just because they're in the form of a photo doesn't make them any less valuable. If anything, it's just more accessible, and it allows you to look at more different things, you know. So references are super important when it comes to increasing your visual library and growing it. And the bigger it gets, the more ideas will come to your head when you're not looking at a reference. And this is the idea. So, you know, if you have a very, very solid and very broad visual library, you'll be able to create a lot more things without having to look at references. And that means that, you know, this is why experienced artists don't have to look at references all the time. Maybe they'll look at a couple things here and there to do a painting, or not at all, because their visual library is so developed, because they've looked at so many references in their lives that it's stored in their brain instead of you know, having to put them on a file like this. So using references, super important, and you should always do it, always, because the second you're not doing it, you're not improving. Okay, so now we're going to be creating our color palette. So I always say that it's great to use as much reference as possible whenever you paint, or whenever you're you're trying to learn how to paint or to improve. And another reference that can be very, very beneficial is using photos for color palettes. What I'm going to be doing here is grabbing a photo that I found online here, and I recommend car wallpaper photos because they're always very, very colorful, and like the color palette's always very striking. Or other ones that are cool also are jet fighter planes. Those are also very, very interesting pictures most of the time, and obviously other people's artwork. But in this case, we're going to be using this photo, and all we're going to be doing is color picking a couple colors in there, and that's what we're going to be using as our base for when we start a painting. So obviously you can create the color palette from scratch on your own if you're very experienced, but in this case we're just learning, so we're gonna take a color palette that already works and sort of inspire ourselves from it. So all you have to do is create a new layer. So create a new layer with nothing on it, and this layer is going to be used for our color palette exclusively. So all you have to do is select a bunch of the more obvious colors in there, and draw them somewhere on the canvas so that you can source from them at a later time you need it. So we're gonna grab a couple blues here, maybe the sky also, get some of those oranges down here, more saturated ones, lighter ones, and then maybe some of the car blues, so something like this, something like that, maybe this purple here, it's interesting. Alright, and you should be good. That's all you really need. Maybe you want to get the red also, or not, as a highlight color. Let's not do that. And there you have it. You would have your color palette, and now you would be ready to start.